On the 6th of July 1965, the quiet fields near Little Baldon, Oxfordshire, became the setting for one of Britain's most tragic military air accidents. Moments earlier, the sound of radial engines had traced a path over the hedgerows. Minutes later, smoke rose where wheat should have waved. 41 servicemen lost their lives, hero men, and soldiers on a routine training flight. The landscape today is peaceful, but the ground holds a memory that the local villagers and the Royal Air Force have kept alive for 6 decades. The aircraft was a Handley Page Hastings C1A, code TG577, flown by number 36 Squadron from RAF Abingdon, introduced after the war. The Hastings was the RAF's dependable hauler for Bristol Hercules radial engines, a capacious fuselage, and a reputation for rugged service. Thousands of troops, supplies, and trainees had flown safely in its webbed seats. It wasn't glamorous, but it was trusted, a known quantity to pilots, engineers, and parachute instructors who worked with it every day. The day's task was straightforward. Depart RAF Abingdon, proceed to the drop zone at Weston-on-the-Green for parachute training. Then recover to RAF Benson. It's a short, familiar circuit across Oxfordshire. Crew and instructors had done versions of this many times. Checklists, timings, altitudes, and radio calls all laid out in a well-rehearsed rhythm. Nothing about the plan hinted at danger. Inside sat 41 men, in total 6 crew and 35 passengers, made up of RAF and Army personnel, including parachute jump instructors and trainees. Kit bags were secured on the floor. Helmets and harnesses were ready for the routine to come. In the cabin it was warm, busy, and noisy, but ordinary. The kind of military flying that rarely makes news, precisely because it is so carefully disciplined. Shortly after 4 p.m., TG577 accelerated along Abingdon runway and lifted into clear air. From the cockpit, the countryside unrolled in greens and golds. From the cabin, the engine note settled into its steady cruise hum. The crew began setting up for the task ahead. If there was any sign of trouble, it was too subtle to register, at least for the first few minutes. Then something changed. The aircraft developed controlled difficulties, and the captain reported intentions to return. When a transport's pitch response feels wrong, every movement becomes deliberate. Small inputs, cross-checks, trim adjustments. Eyes moving between the horizon, the instruments, and each other's hands on the controls. Training takes over. Voices stay calm. Procedures are followed, even as adrenaline sharpens the senses. On the ground, witnesses noticed the tail wobble, the nose pitching up, and the Hastings climbing at an angle no pilot would choose so close to the airfield. All 4 engines sounded healthy, but power cannot compensate for lost control of the tail. The aircraft stalled. Altitude bled away. With little height in hand, there was no room to recover. The big transport descended toward open farmland near 100 acres. The impact carved a dark scar through the barley. Fire took hold quickly in the dry crop, and a column of smoke marked the field's position for miles. The first instinct of those nearby farmers, walkers, and villagers was to run toward the smoke, then to stop short at the heat, the flames, the reality. There were no survivors. The scale of the loss would only be fully understood as the service gathered the roll call. Within minutes, RAF crash crews and local emergency services reached the scene via farm tracks. They fought fire, secured wreckage, and created paths for investigators who would arrive soon after. For villagers, the day would be remembered in sights and smells. Scorched wheat, damp foam on warm earth, the bright red of crashed tenders against a gold field. For the service personnel, it was the hardest kind of duty, professionalism in the face of irreversible loss. Across nearby lanes and estates, people recalled the sound, the unusual nose, up attitude, and the way the aircraft seemed to wobble at the tail before it fell away from view. Eyewitness accounts are imperfect, but patterns matter, and these impressions pointed investigators toward the elevator and tailplane, the heart of an aircraft's pitch control. Somewhere between the pilot's hands and the movable surfaces at the tail, authority had been lost. A joint RAF AIB investigation began almost immediately. In hangars and workshops, engineers laid out the control system from yoke to tail. Part by part, bell cranks, push rods, linkages, and, crucially, the fasteners that tied them together. They examined fracture surfaces with magnifiers and calipers, correlated maintenance histories, and compared similar parts across the wider Hastings fleet to look for systemic weakness. The conclusion was devastating in its simplicity. 2 elevator control bolts had failed from metal fatigue. Over time, microscopic cracks had grown under repeated loads until the bolts fractured. When they let go, the crew's inputs no longer commanded the tailplane as intended. With pitch authority compromised at low altitude, recovery was impossible. It was a small, hidden fault with consequences beyond measure. In response, the RAF grounded the Hastings fleet for inspection, then accelerated the type's retirement. Maintenance procedures and inspection intervals were updated, with fresh attention to fatigue life and the silent growth of cracks in critical fasteners. These measures could not undo the tragedy in Oxfordshire, but they became part of the legacy. Lessons written into engineering, practice to protect future crews. The human cost was 41 lives, 6 crewmen and 35 passengers. Units paused training. Letters and telegrams went out across Britain. Chapels filled. The men represented different trades, ranks, and regiments, bound by a single aircraft and a shared duty. Behind the numbers were families and friends who measured the weeks afterward, not by calendar pages, but by the next service, the next letter, the next small reminder of a life interrupted today. Inside St. Lawrence's Church, Toot Baldon, a marble memorial lists the names of those lost. An RAF ensign stands beside it. Sunlight from stained glass moves across the stone as the hours turn. Each July, wreaths are laid and voices lower in respect, reaffirming a promise made in 1965 that the men of Hastings TG577 will be remembered, and that their sacrifice helped make flying safer for those who followed.